My dears, a long time it's been, but I'm back with recording somewhere Lamento beyond the void. I have not played in quite a long time, actually. Since July, as you can see. But yes, I'm finally ready to record some more for you, and I have some time over, so let's see if I can get a part or two recorded for you today. Let's hop right into it. I hope the audio is doing fine. We will see when it's time. Konoe presented the dagger and Rai snatched it in silence and sheathed it. He opened his mouth and then closed it again. Rai turned with a dubious face. There were many things Konoe wanted to ask, but for some reason he had trouble saying them.
なんだ
どうして出て行かなかったんだ
本来ならば今すぐにでも出て行きたいところだ。だが、お前がここに残るのならば仕方あるまい。
Rai sighed and crossed his arms, his tail swaying.
お前は貴重なサンガだ。離れている間に何かあったら困る。
A valuable sangha. That's right. But for some reason his chest felt pained. Not knowing how to respond, Konoe cast his eyes down and searched for the right words. Rai was silent as well. Konoe really wanted to ask what kind of relationship Rai had with Bado, but it just wasn't the right time. A little irritated, he opened his mouth as if trying to lighten the mood.
部屋は右側奥の2部屋だどっちに
At this moment, Konoe heard knocking on the window. Asato! Surprised, he looked back. Straight ahead at the end of the hallway, outside of the large window, he saw the upside-down torso of a black cat.
アサト
トカゲか、あいつは。
Rai muttered and frowned. When Konoe opened the window, Asato nimbly slipped inside. Fresh air flowed in as well, grazing the tip of his nose.
部屋は取れたのか
今ちょうどその話をしてたそこの2部屋だどっちかに2匹入って
俺はコノエと一緒がいい
Yes, of course. Saying this abruptly, Asato glared at Rai. Rai also returned a cold gaze his way.
奴隷が飼い主と同じ部屋に入るつもりか。
Excuse me, that is fucking rude.
お前はコノエを傷つけるだから一緒にはさせない
お前が決めることじゃないだろう。
Guess that's true, yes. It's not really for him to decide. But like, it's also not your, you also can't decide it. And so it began. It seemed like these two were determined to always bicker face to face. Even with Konoe around, he should probably have entered as mediator, but after what happened between Bado and Rai earlier, Konoe was halfway fed up already. He sighed and opened his mouth.
決めるのはあんたでもアサトでもない俺だ
Yes.
そんなもの考えるまでもないことだ。
Yes. At Rai's words, Konoe felt the tip of his ears twitch. In other words, he was saying that it was only natural that they would share a room. How self-important could this cat get? Whatever the reason, he could downright assume that he was in no mood to argue.
アサトと同じ部屋にする
Rai scowled and gave Konoe a look as if he just said something stupid.
サンガのことがある。
Well, duh.
別にその時だけあんたのところに行けばいいだろう何も同室じゃなきゃいけないってわけじゃない
If he became emotional, he'd end up on the same level as these bickering cats. Even though Konoe knew this well, his ignited irritation could not quite be extinguished. Ignited, sorry.
コノエが言ったことだコノエに決める権利がある
Yes.
黙れ。お前のそれはダダをこねているだけだろうが。
俺はそうしたいと思ったことを言っただけだ。お前の言い方は決めつけてる。
Aye.
俺が決めたんだから、それでいいだろ。
Unable to stand in this argument that seemed to go on without end, Konoe gave a hurt shout. Whoops.
とにかく、もう決めたんだから、この話はこれで終わりだ。
Yes.
これ、鍵。
Konoe held out one of the keys and I snatched it with a look of disgust and entered his own room. Watching the door slam, Konoe exhaled softly.
コノエ、
Turning when called, Konoe saw Asato looking at him with an apologetic face.
なんだよ。お前がそんな顔することないだろ。
でも迷惑をかけた。俺はあいつと話すのはどうしても苦手で。
Which is very understandable because I do not like him either, so I guess we're on the same page. It looked like he was contemplating why he was so annoyed. Seeing Asato with his head lowered and ears drooping, his irritated feelings calmed down a little. There was no harm meant, not from Asato, and probably not from Rai either.
ライも悪いやつじゃないんだけどな。あの態度、どうにかならないのかな。
That is very correct.
潰すしかないだろう。
Excuse me. You have to smash him? What do you mean smash? I'm not, huh? The meaning of his words unclear, Konoe was startled. Did he dislike Rai that much? However, Asato kept talking with a very serious face.
あいつは強い。だからきっと頭も心も石のように頑丈で硬いはずだ。潰して砕くしかない。
Not knowing how to react to that, Konoe stared at Asato with his mouth wide open. Asato may certainly be a poor speaker, but on the other hand, there were times like these when he perceived things with a strange sense. Since he spoke with so few words, anyone listening could not possibly comprehend his explanations.
とりあえず、部屋に入ろうか。
Yes, let's just go in, get in, and sleep.
そうだな。
Suddenly he's cheered up. With a nod, Asato happily raised his tail. Thinking he was like a completely different cat now, Konoe opened the door to the room and stepped inside. Well, it looks like every other room that we have yet lived in. The room had the same structure and interior decoration as the room he had stayed in before. That's what I meant. All of them likely looked the same. At dusk, Konoe ventured out to the bustling streets alone. He reached out to the other two as well. But Rai was caring for his sword and Asato told him he disliked crowds, so he had to go by himself. Konoe didn't really like the boisterous noise very much either, actually. Even though there were celebrations in Kaoru, they were really small. However, since Konoe had yet to see such a merry festival, he couldn't stifle his own curiosity towards the lively city. Leaving the inn, Konoe paused for a second. Looking over his surroundings, he noticed he'd subconsciously been mindful of the other cat's gazes. The markings had already disappeared. Both his tail and his ears had returned to their original color. Before, he would look strange, but now Konoe just looked normal. There was nothing to worry about. Thinking about it, for some reason he felt that, through his haze, he should have seen this in a positive light. With or without the curse markings, he was still the same. Himself. Konoe shook his head to clear his thoughts. It was an unusual sentiment and he felt that there was no use for it. The dusky town was crowded with both too many cats and wares, but he was able to watch the hustle and bustle. The masks and costumes in the stalls basked in orange light were beautiful. The music from the festival colored the unreal atmosphere of the city. Walking as closely to the edge of the road as he could, he surveyed his surroundings. Cats danced to the music of a band, and vendors called out with enthusiastic voices from their storefronts. Starting tomorrow, the festival was set to last for 3 days. While the cats of the town were doing business, Konoe could see everyone was letting their emotions show for the day. It seemed like they'd looked forward to this. For at least today, Konoe wanted to be a part of this liveliness. He tried to lose himself in the atmosphere too. Still, nothing was over yet. His own presence may have posed a risk to the cats of Ransen, but just for now. He stopped and slowly closed his eyes. The cats' voices, singing voices, music, noise, cheers, chatter, footsteps, the grandeur, the air, and he was part of it all. When he opened his eyes, Konoe exhaled gently and began to walk. Coming to the city, his goal was to see Tokino. Konoe was really concerned about him and could only wonder if he was safe. As Konoe went with the flow of cats, he barely managed to reach the back alley, relying solely on his memories to find his way. Eventually, he was able to see Tokino's house. The shop was open today. Surrounded by various tools, it seemed more like a shed than a shop. They probably replenished with stocks obtained from all over. Between the stacks of pots and wooden boxes, a waving tail peeped out. Gradually, a cat appeared from behind the wares. It was Tokino, whose arms were bogged down with packages. He put the bags on the floor with a thud, then sighed and looked up, dusting off his hands. Then he noticed Konoe immediately, and his eyes became round with surprise.
Hare? Konoe?
Tokino rushed out from the store, his whole face turned upwards with a broad smile.
もう戻ってきたんだ。もっと長旅になるもんだとばっかり思ってたよ。
思ったより早く肩がついたから。
無事でよかった。おかえり、コノエ。
Tokino purred and nudged his nose to Konoe's shoulder. His voice was always a kind, gentle one, and Konoe sighed in relief. Konoe also gently nudged his nose to Tokino's shoulder in return.
何か起きたりしなかったか？
特には。コノエこそさっきから気になってたんだけど、その尻尾染めたの？
Dyed. Startled, Tokino pointed at Konoe's tail with his finger. Konoe silently shook his head.
え？ってことは。
When Konoe peeled back the gauntlet on his arms to let Tokino see, Tokino blinked several times in surprise.
あざがなくなってる？コノエ、もしかして。
Yes.
ああ。多分な。
よかったな。
Tokino swished his tail excitedly, his lips spreading into a broad smile as he laughed from the bottom of his heart. It was Konoe's turn to be wide-eyed when he saw this. Why was Tokino so happy for him? It wasn't like this was his problem. As if he were reading Konoe's thoughts, Tokino shrugged his shoulders bashfully.
もう苦しくはないんだろ？
ああ。
大事な友達が苦しみから解放されたんだ。嬉しいし、本当に良かったと思ってるよ。
Important friend, that is very, very cute.
そうか。
うん。
Tokino expressing his feelings so honestly made Konoe feel faint warmth in the depths of his chest. As he lowered his face so that his embarrassment couldn't be seen, a subtle smile formed on Konoe's lips.
ここで盛大にお祝いをと言いたいところなんだけど、祭りの間は父さんが行商で留守にしちゃうからさ。 店番頼まれてるんだ。ごめん。
Seeing Tokino lower his ears, Konoe shook his head.
ああ、この絵って乱戦の祭りは初めてだよな。
そうだな。
祭りは冬と春の2回あるんだよ。冬の祭りは春と違って明るい感じじゃないけど、でも楽しいと思うから。
あ
そうだ。あとこれ。
Tokino looked over at the jar behind him and removed something. In his outstretched palm, there were 3 dried queens.
せめてものお祝いってことで持っていけよ。
売り物だろ。
いいから。
Taking hold of Konoe's hand, Tokino handed him the queens. One by one, he closed Konoe's fingers around them so he held on tight. Tokino looked to him with a mischievous face and laughing eyes.
しっかり食べて早く大きくなれよ。
Huge? Okiro. What do you mean huge?
バカ。
After that, they looked at each other and suppressed their laughter. Surely at this moment, this one time only, Konoe felt like he'd gone back to the peaceful days he'd spent in Kouru. After a while, Konoe told Tokino that he would stop by ever so often, and about where he was staying for the time being. Konoe bade him farewell and returned to the inn. The moon of light was about to set and night was about to begin. Doesn't look very like night. Oh, never mind, it's getting dark. Once he opened the door and set foot in the inn, a pleasant smell drifted his way. There seemed to be a dining hall in the back of the waiting room. Konoe turned, debating on dropping in, but he hesitated at the sound of lively laughter. Naturally, this must have been where other inn guests gathered. However, Konoe felt shy when coming into contact with other cats, and he eventually decided to return to his room. Bado wasn't at the reception desk, but the words, "Dinner is being prepared," were written in the lodging book. There was just a note that other businesses would have to wait for a while. Bado did the cooking himself? Konoe recalled his carefree attitude. It seemed so unexpected of Bado. Konoe was ascending the stairs to the second floor when he suddenly stopped his feet. He was lost in thought for a moment, but he eventually dragged himself back and left the inn. For some reason, he didn't feel like returning to his room. To be more precise, he just didn't want to meet Rai or Asato. Leaving the entryway and turning around to the back of the house, Konoe, startled, started to quickly climb a tree growing next to the inn. He jumped down to the roof of the inn, then scooted down until he was at the edge and took a seat. A strong wind brushed against his cheek and blew past. The Ransen nightscape opened under his eyes, and the forest surrounded the town like an endless black ring with no end in sight. Because of the festival, Ransen was still lively, even at night. He could even feel traces of the daytime hustle and bustle. Exhaling a small sigh, Konoe narrowed his eyes to look to the forest and the endless sky. He didn't want to meet Rai or even Asato. It wasn't because he didn't like them, and Konoe was just at a loss. Until now, he had been just a normal cat living an ordinary life in Kaoru. Konoe felt a slight pain. He had wanted things the way they were before. For now, he had to leave all those ordinary things behind. Konoe had forgotten nothing, and everything up until now hadn't turned out the way he wanted. He wanted to forget it all. Suddenly, Konoe succumbed to these kinds of thoughts. However, he understood. These thoughts, it wouldn't take much to escape them, but it wasn't over yet. There were still many unsolved mysteries. If he stopped here, the story would be strange and unclear. That was surely why it would begin from here. Something would. These kinds of ominous thoughts rushed through his head. Konoe swayed his tail widely. While he half held an intuition that convinced him otherwise, he hoped it was just an imaginary fear. Just now, he suddenly remembered the cream fruits he had received from Tokino and took one out of his flax bag to pop it in his mouth. The sour sweetness began to gradually blur the tips of Konoe's tongue, giving him slight relief and resolve. Running away would change nothing. Eventually, Konoe would have no other choice than to stand up and fight in the end. He felt it from his experiences so far. He could avert his eyes, but something important would slip away. Therefore, slowly standing up and taking a deep breath, Konoe made up his mind to go back to the room. Returning to the inn, he went up the stairs to the second floor. As he proceeded down the hallway, he passed the door on the right side that led to his and Asato's room. He gripped the doorknob and pushed the door open. The room Konoe entered into was pitch black. Konoe took out the guiding leaf from his flax bag and opened the lid of the water basin set at his feet. When he gently dipped it in and pulled it back out, the leaf immediately emitted a glowing light. Relying on his light, Konoe looked around while using it as a guide. Small dishes had been put up the shelves near the bed. Stepping forward and taking one in his hand, Konoe scooped water from the water basin and let the leaf fall gently inside. He wanted to use fire as little as possible. In the moment he felt relief, Konoe suddenly sensed a presence to his immediate side and jumped. The fur on his tail bristled on end all at once.
おかえり。
Konoe was surprised, so surprised that he had instinctively drawn his claws to lash out. The owner of this voice was Asato. Did he completely conceal his presence? Konoe hadn't noticed him at all.
気配消してたのか。驚いただろう。
すまない。ついつもの癖で。
癖？
キラでは陰の月が空高く昇ると、たとえ村の中であってもできるだけ気配を殺す、そういう掟だ。
To Asato's mind, the village of Kira was the entire world. Its laws were completely ingrained into him. However, it was different now.
確かに身を守るためには有効な手段だと思うけど、ここ。
そうか。
そうか。Asato said with a slight sigh as he was lowering.
悪いって言ってるわけじゃない。そこまで落ち込むなよ。
Giving a little smile at Asato's look, Konoe sat on the bed near the wall. Fishing around in the bag he held in his hand, he took out the creams he received from Tokino and handed one to Asato.
もらったんだ。食えよ。
すまない。
Asato was happy as he took a seat on the bed by the window across from Konoe, beginning to nibble at the fruit. I always wondered how big these fruit are, because if like 2 or 3 of them can make one fall, they must be quite big, but well, it doesn't sound like they are, I guess. As his slender black tail slowly swayed, he began to purr. Konoe was a little bashful, wondering why he was so happy.
うまいか？
ああ。
そうか。
Looking at Asato made him feel a warm feeling, and Konoe laughed, loosening the tension in his shoulders. Maybe alright. Konoe thought this suddenly. He, who was still a Kaoru cat, could never return home. However, maybe everything would be alright. He had no reason or grounds to feel this way, and he might still have to fight against something, but he merely felt this vaguely. The following morning was lively, probably because it was the first day of Anto. Even with the window closed, the music and the noise still seemed to seep into the room, and Konoe's ears constantly swiveled in all directions. It was the first time he'd heard so much noise, and for some reason he felt a little uncomfortable. While he sat on the bed and groomed his arm, he shook his tail many times. As for Asato, he seemed just as ill at ease with this noise as Konoe. He sat with his back leaning against the bed. The tip of his tail swaying, Asato's ears moved busily, seeming to constantly pick up sounds from every direction. His tense line of vision was firmly focused on the window. Konoe wondered how the Ransen festival looked to Asato, who had never left the village of Kira.
キラの村ではこういう祭りってなかったのか？
When he spoke up to him, Asato swiftly looked over to Konoe. His nervous appearance was a little funny.
キラでもあった。けど、村の猫だけで行うものだし、もっと静かだ。
驚いてる？
Masato nodded meekly, and once again his gaze returned to outside of the window. Although Konoe was also surprised at seeing the festival for the first time, when he watched Asato, he felt like showing him around outside. The more things he saw, the more amazed he would be, and Konoe wanted Asato to know that there was more to the world than just Kira.
今日は一緒に外へ出ようか。
His ears quivering with a twitch, Asato looked back at Konoe.
コノエと。
そう。少し祭りを見て回ろう。
Asato's face took on an expression that was hard to describe, and his ears lowered slightly. He was probably at a loss. But Konoe was aware of that when he asked him.
嫌なら無理にとは言わないけど。
いや、行こう。
Like it was a grave decision, Asato looked straight ahead at Konoe and slowly nodded.
そんなに緊張しなくても大丈夫だよ。きっと楽しいから。
そうか。
After getting dressed, Konoe left the room with Asato. Then the door to the room just to their right opened. Rai stepped out. Rai gave Konoe and Asato a fleeting look with his blue eye, then turned for the stairs like nothing happened. Following behind him, Konoe's group went down the stairs. When they went to the waiting room, Konoe involuntarily froze at the scene before his eyes, stunned. What in the world was this? There. They wore strange masks and costumes. It was full of shady, suspicious-looking cats.
変だ。
Masato thought the same thing, his expression becoming tense.
これがアントの格好なのか。
仮装だろう。
Rai didn't look very surprised in particular, and he surveyed the waiting room with a composed gaze. When he heard about a festival, Konoe imagined something glamorous, but the image he had of the showy festival was completely wrong. If anything, everyone was dressed just like that shaman. These cats and their restless laughter were strange.
そんなとこで立ち止まって何やってんだ。降りてこいよ。
When Konoe heard that, he relaxed. That relaxed, deep voice, and looked around. He saw Bado looking up at them from amidst the costume cats. He ain't getting dressed up? Rai frowned and clicked his tongue. When he went down the stairs to the waiting room, Konoe saw the costume cats up close and became more and more nervous. There was some kind of strange intensity about them.
寝心地はどうだった？よく眠れたか？今日は安東の第一日目だ。盛り上がってるぞ。
Bado approached with steps as leisurely as his voice. Rai completely turned away.
すごい格好だな、みんな。
It's like a cosplay convention. Everyone's just dressing up.
伝統ってやつだ。 乱戦ができてすぐの頃からずっと続いてる。二つ杖も似たようなことをよくやってたらしいな。
Stopping in the middle of his words, Bado looked at Asato.
ああ、あんたが3匹目か。
Sanpiki. Asato, who was bad with interacting with other people, lowered his head in caution with a jerk of his chin and stood vigilantly on guard.
俺はこの宿をやってるバルドだ。
アサトだ。
アサト。あんた、一体いつ入ってきたんだ？昨日今日と俺はずっと受付にいたが、俺の知る限りじゃ見た記憶がないんだが。
Sneaky. Not minding Asato's attitude of pulling away a bit, Bado cocked his head and cast his gaze on him.
窓だ。
窓？
窓だ。
窓から入った？
入った。
そう。
Oh no. Bado had a dumbfounded look on his face for a moment, but then he looked down and nodded as if he were overwhelmed by Asato's calm assertions.
いや、祭りの時は無礼講だ。で、あんたたちも仮装してみるか？
Konoe was at a loss for words at the question. He wanted to excuse himself if possible.
絶対しなきゃいけないのか。
いや、ただうちで衣装を貸してやれるからな。聞いただけだ。せっかくだから祭りに溶け込んでみるのも楽しいと思うんだが、どうだ？
Though he wanted to object to the fun part, it did sound good. He's just gonna lend us some costumes, alright? Konoe involuntarily looked at Rai and Asato. As if he was fatigued by all of the noise, Asato just stared blankly. And Rai, needless to say, was turned in the entirely opposite direction.
せっかくだけど。
そうか。まあ気が向いたら適当に声をかけてくれ。それから表通りの方にも出てみるといい。仮装は乱戦の祭りの名物でもあるからな。いろいろ見られる。楽しんでこい。
あ、
There would be just way too many people for me. I would never do that. Bado lightly raised one hand, then moved to the back of the reception desk with his long tail trailing behind him. When his nemesis vanished, Rai exhaled sharply.
コノエ。
When Konoe turned at the call, he saw Asato's face slightly clouded in both confusion and agitation.
表通りへ行くのか。
一応そのつもりだ。朝とはどうする？
ついていく。
He was probably tired just thinking of the busy streets. His voice was low, so Konoe wondered if he was upset. Rai sighed for the up-10th time and turned, walking towards the entryway.
おい、
なんだ？
あんたはどうするんだ？
Without replying to Konoe's question, Rai left the inn. Konoe reflexively ran after him. As soon as they went out the door, Konoe's hair bristled. When they were in the inn, loud noise and music flowed in like waves. Now, it was like the floodgates had been opened to that stream. A frenzy of excitement struck his skin vividly. He felt a flutter in his stomach, as evidence of his increasing enthusiasm. He gasped and swallowed. Like Bado said, there were definitely many cats who changed into costumes. There were groups too, with dark colors befitting a winter festival. The atmosphere could even have been called evil. The music brought on a strange air rather than a cheerful one. Konoe was surprised by the festival itself, but what overwhelmed him above all was its influence on the cats. Usually the streets were filled with cats coming and going, but now the individuals were warm and united. Feelings of delight welled up so much they threatened to burst forth, beating on the door of Konoe's empathy. Even though he restrained himself, it forcibly bore down on him. It may have been the first time he felt such a strong empathy for something other than anger or sorrow. His tail trembled at its base. Gazing through the street's liveliness, he realized that Rai's figure was nowhere to be seen. He's safe. to overwrite. Overwrite, yes. Alright.